All right, 6:47. Let's have a look at some of the newspapers this morning. Sunday Times has the Defence Secretary forced to abandon a trip to Odessa in Ukraine over fears he could be targeted in a Russian missile strike.
And the Sunday Telegraph leads with claims that right-wing Tory MPs are using Penny Mordaunt as a stalking horse to get rid of the Prime Minister.
Mail on Sunday has friends of Diana, Princess of Wales, expressing anger after an advert used her fatal crash to promote euthanasia.
And Nigel Farage plots Sunak's demise is the headline on the front of the Sunday Express.
All right, let's see what Emma Wolfe, the writer and journalist Tom Slater, make of all of this. Morning to you both.
Morning.
Very briefly, what did you make of the Russia thing? You know, Moscow's lovely, everyone's
I was going to say, it sounds better than the UK.
transparent.
I wanted to move there suddenly. Things are happening, buildings are being built. I mean, look, we know it's not much of a contest. In fact, it's anything but. And the fact that the three opponents are kind of not refraining from criticising him, it's clear that Putin is rubber-stamping his next 6 years, isn't he?
Yeah.
But, yeah, really good to hear from that guy. To get that kind of footage on the ground where what are the polling stations actually like? People aren't being forcibly marched into them in handcuffs.
No.
No, but when there's only one real candidate to vote for,
I know, but we
don't need to, do
I
you?
agree with you, but we have our opinions of what we think, and it's actually good to hear what it's actually...
Yeah.
And I suppose when the biggest issue really confronting the country is the war, and the fact that you can be locked up almost instantly for protesting that war gives you a bit of a sense of how much a thumb on the
Well, and
scale.
we've literally seen people who've been brave enough to do that.
Absolutely.
To protest, and we don't know what's happened to them. But, yes, they're very brave to do it.
Right, Tom, talking about leaderships. In the front of the Observer this morning, they're talking about the plot to replace Rishi Sunak.
Yes, of course, you've been talking about it all morning. The plan supposedly cooked up by right-wing Tory MPs in conversation with moderates to install Penny Mordaunt either as a stalking horse or as a caretaker. Different cliches have been recycled this morning. If this plan is real, it would be one to try and not probably win the next election, but just sort of stem the bleeding. It's not obvious to me that Rishi Sunak can do particularly well as Tory leader at the next election, but I don't think any Tory leader could do very well at the next election. The damage is already done. It's not entirely clear to me that this plot is particularly credible. I mean, if the plan was to get Penny Mordaunt on side, a string of headlines saying that she's basically just going to be their puppet is probably not going to endear her to that particular plan.
No.
And it has been shot down even by some quite prominent allies of hers, David Davis being one. So I'm not sure if this is something to be taken completely seriously, but it's an indication of the mood in the Conservative Party at the moment, which is they've finally realised, probably about at least 6 months after everyone else in the country has, that they're toast and they are just thrashing around looking for any possible way to try and...
So why the heck don't they just call an election now and just, you know, get it over and done with and then start to rebuild, yes, maybe in opposition?
Well, why not? Well, June isn't ruled out. May is obviously ruled out now. The front page of the Mail on Sunday has this devastating poll for the Tories, but as Tom says, I mean, most of us knew this 6 months ago. Penny Mordaunt, a kind of empty vessel that they can put... But who wants to lead their party, you know, and into certain defeat? Why don't they get it over with now, Anne? Well, actually, I think a lot of ministers are quite keen on having another 6 months of salary, of drivers...
Do you really think it's that cynical?
I think when you are facing defeat, when you are facing the fact that you will not be in power, things like that actually are relevant. I think... What benefit do they get? I mean, there are other things there, whether small boat crossings go up massively over the summer, whether it's better now than, you know, the other side of the summer, that kind of stuff, whether we want to clash with November and the US elections and all of that. But I think also the practicalities. You know, do you really want to vote yourself out to make yourself jobless, unemployed in the next couple of months, or do you want to wait until the autumn?
Yeah, I suppose it's a fair point in a way.
I suppose it is, yeah.
I suppose the other thing is, given the dire state of the economy, the idea of the Tories going to an election in a situation where Labour could say we're technically in a recession or anything like that seems like a bit of a non-starter. I think it is just that desire to say, hopefully something will turn up. Anything will turn up to try and shift the dial. I mean, that gives an indication of how bad things are, but it's an understandable calculation, I suppose, at this point, because surely it can't get any more dire than this. But we have said that before.
Meanwhile,
where the Tories are concerned.
The current Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, he's made the headlines a fair bit over the last couple of days.
Yeah, well, he was the other day calling for 3% to be spent on defence. So this was, I think, the 6th of March. I can't establish exactly. I think it was the 6th or 7th of March. He was on a 3-day visit to Ukraine with his officials. And it was just the day after, shortly after that near miss on Zelensky and the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis, which actually, and this was in Odessa, and that there was a huge explosion just a few hundred metres from their motorcade, which actually killed 5 people. You know, it was a big explosion. That was right close to Zelensky, and from that, sort of, there was a sense there was a credible threat to the safety of Shapps, Grant Shapps and his people. And so he was forced to abandon his visit to Odessa, the southern port city, and didn't go. But yeah, he's been around and about, and as you say, calling for more money for defence. So we shall see, because we've got loads of money going spare in this country, as you know.
Yeah, rolling in
Lost
it.
with it, yeah.
Onto the Express and Nigel Farage again. What's he up to? Is there any plotting? You think so? Stephen thinks that he's definitely on the phone to Boris, and they're talking.
So. I think so.
But
Crazy not
this
to.
story says Farage plots Sunak's demise.
It's the kind of perennial will he, won't he come back to frontline politics, which has been going on for quite some time now. And it's a combination of things, isn't it? Because Reform are doing very well, you know, relatively speaking. Of course, they're on about 12% of the polls, roughly speaking. They have now just got their first MP in the form of Lee Anderson, which will be a very significant kind of boost to them in terms of their ability to cut through on the media and things like this. And they are clearly benefiting from the demoralisation of the Tory vote, the sense of what was the point. We voted for a kind of Brexity Boris Johnson figure, and we've ended up with this sort of slick technocrat who doesn't set anyone's pulses racing. And the question is he going to come back? In terms of the Express story, it's a little bit thin on the details, but what you seem to hear is he will be kind of leading the campaign. We're not talking about him replacing Richard Tice as leader, who he was very concerned to praise very much in the quotes that he was giving to the Sunday Express in order to make clear that that's not what's going on here. But it is a reminder that in terms of various iterations of this party, whether it's the Reform Party, the Brexit Party, UKIP, they have struggled at points in which Farage decided to take a step back from the limelight. In terms of having that level of cut-through, he is, regardless of what you think of him, a very gifted communicator, politically speaking, and it's hard not to conclude that their fortunes would be significantly boosted if he did decide to take on that bigger role. Will he, given the fact that he seems to be quite enjoying himself, both of his role at this particular parish, but also going out and covering politics in America, being in television, going into the jungle and so on? Does he really want to kind of step back into the fray? That's not entirely clear, but I think it's unbelievable that he wouldn't have some quite prominent role in the election.
I'll tell you what, if a few more MPs cross the floor, that could significantly change this election, couldn't it?
Yeah, and look, I mean,
makes Reform look viable.
Well, and they do look viable. If you've got the Conservatives, you know, the worst polls are showing the Conservatives on 20 and Reform on 10. That is significant, given they've come from a standing start. I agree with Tom. You know, it's great that Lee Anderson is going to raise their profile. They've now got an MP in the chamber. But I still think that Nigel Farage is probably keeping his powder dry. I don't think... Ben Habib and Richard Tice were saying there's a big announcement coming from Reform, and everyone was sort of rubbing their hands. But I think it's more, you know, Nigel sort of putting his support behind them rather than actually taking on that leadership role or any kind of problem. I think he wants to wait and see how the next election shakes out.
Well, don't we all? Emma, Tom, thank you very much indeed. Here's your weather.